But I was lucky that I listened to my passion. And then that's when the audition for Hi-5 came along. So
are you serious? So you just left school when you did that?
It was a couple of years later. Yeah.
Wow. And so tell me how that all came about. How do you even know about auditions? And then, how did it all work? Because hang on, 2008, if you were in it then.
I finished 06. I finished in 06.
Oh, so let me go back then. Sorry, I've got all those dates wrong. How new was Hi-5 then? Were you one of the early members?
I replaced Charli. So they'd been around for about 9 or 10 years since I joined. I actually remember having been to the Easter show and buying a Hi-5 bucket cap years ago. So strange that I ended up joining.
Yeah. So what was that like? And what was it like? What's it like when you turn up for the first day at work when you're a member of Hi-5?
Well, going back to the original question of how do you even know about it is that I had signed up with a new management. So I'd outgrown the kids agency at Brant Street, and someone that had worked there, Mark, had known me, and he's like, well, as soon as you turn 18, I want you on my books. So I joined his agency. I got sent for quite a few castings for TV commercials, and I booked all of them. So I think that was like a little test.
Any famous ads that we can keep an eye out for you?
What have I done? Oh, in the recent times, there's been a few. They're still on air. But back then, there was a St. George Bank out with them. I was a little girl playing soccer with my dad, and it was like I'd miss the ball, and then I'd catch the ball and I was running around. I was over in all the banks and everything, and I remember just getting that ad going, why don't the bank give me free money from now on?
Yeah, well, why don't they? It is a good question.
Yeah, I was in their windows. So, that was kind of exciting landing all those jobs. But then when Hi-5 came along and they said, look, we think you're ready for this audition because it's a very well-established group traveling the world already. And I was so young that replacing the favourite was going to be tricky. Not that, she was the favourite of everybody, but she was the pink girl.
No, she was a very well-known one. You were either Hi-5 or Wiggles, and I have to say I've got 3 boys and we did much more Wiggles, but even I knew of Charli.
That's it, yeah. She was the blonde, curly hair, doing her part on the show so well that I remember going for the audition. There were so many people, and I came home. I remember going into the audition going, I don't really want this. And then the day one I went in, I want this. There's something triggered me, and I was like, I'm going to get this. So I really, that's when the resilience and the sacrifice came in for that 2-week period of auditions. I just worked and worked. I bought all the DVDs. I learnt all the shows back to front. Like I just learnt everything inside and out in case they said, do the show, and I could do it.
Right. Yeah, of course. So that's a hell of a lot of work. So you got in, and what happens then?
Straight on tour.
Really? Did you go overseas straight away?
New Zealand, yep.
Right.
So we did a full New Zealand tour. And I think this is a key sort of point that I'll point out, that if you're ever joining a team that's already established or you're joining a workforce, there's a getting to know you phase where you feel like you're not going to fit in or you're the new kid. And I really struggled for the first year. They'd been there for 10 years. They knew each other inside and out. There was breakups and there were friendships. And then I'm the excited 18, 20-year-old that's come in.
Who's all green and enthusiastic when they're probably a little bit jaded as well.
Because I remember my time 5 years in the new excited green ones. I was like, oh, come on. It's like, but
it's such a huge thing to land I would say at any age, but particularly when you're younger.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I suppose for the family and having all that touring, it was, it's just being thrust into a professional environment overnight. I'll tell you what, I learned a lot, and I learned more about work ethic than I think I could ever in any kind of department in any of part of my life than that. Because you have to do it. You have to show up for work. I didn't in 5 years have one sick day,
Well, they do talk about the enormous stress of just constantly living out of a suitcase and doing those long tours. And, of course, as parents, we all sit there in the audience going, aren't they cute? Great. It's only an hour and a half show. They probably all just, have the time off. But it must be grueling, I think is probably the word I would imagine.
Well, it's the thing that I think that you never switch off. Do you know what I mean? Like even when you're walking to and from the bus to get to the hotel, or you check into the hotel, the staff at the hotel know who you are. You always have to be on. You're eating
going
dinner.
to the supermarket looking like death, or, you know,
Even
with
though
made up and everything, and having everyone go, oh my God, it's Casey from Hi-5.
It's so funny, especially when you're in Singapore or the Philippines or something, you know, being blonde haired, I always stood out, and Stevie and I would walk around and we'd be eating our lunch and there'd just be 20 people surrounding our table. So we'll talk to you in a minute. Just finishing my chicken rice.
A little bit unnerving.
Yeah.
So why, what was the impetus to get out?
Well, I guess you have a contract term, and I'd signed a 3-year and then a 2-year, and then a contract term came up. But I was definitely suffering exhaustion, and I was suffering nodules, so I kept having to go on tour and not be able to sing.
Oh, so it was sort of physical. I would have also thought that it would just start grinding you down. I mean, 5 years of doing it is a long time when you've started as such a baby.
Yeah, that's true. And that's a good point, because I never really thought why, but it's like I started working from 12. Don't ever feel like I missed out on my childhood, but I've definitely felt myself being very childish as I hit 30, wanting to do crazy fun things. So I'm like, I didn't get to do it when I was 20. You know?
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think that's allowed.
Yeah.
So you got to the end of the contract, but what do you, like when that's been your job straight out of school, how nerve-wracking is it to sort of say, okay, I'm out, I'm going to go and do something different? Were you terrified?
Yeah, it was the hardest time of my life, I would say, because they kept forcing me with like 1-year contracts or 6-month contracts. And, you know, then everyone else in the group doesn't really want that. You want to have a solid, when you're in a group, you want to know who you're working with, you know how long it's for. Because being on stage, you have to have a bond with everybody. You know, it's like being in an office environment. And if you don't have that, it's just not as fun and the show's not as good. So it also got to the point where we got bought, Hi-5 got bought by an overseas company in Kuala Lumpur, and there was a lot going on over there, and I wanted to be home. I'd been away for a long time. You know, I wanted to try and rekindle some friendships and see what else I could do in the world. You know, I'd been doing the same thing. I knew I was good at it. I'd hit the point where I was like, I'm good at this. I want to see what else I'm good at, and I'll take the risk. So that's what I did.
I love it. Because, I mean, what is there to – the risk is there to some extent, but there is another one, particularly when you're younger and you don't have children and things, where you just kind of go, there's no real risk. Like, I mean, you're going to have to go and find something. But anyway, you know, still scary times, I would imagine. That first morning when you woke up and thought, oh, my God, I'm not with them anymore.